Shabbat Shalom. My name is Michael Washer, and I'm the rabbi of Lev Tzion Messianic Congregation. And today I'm going to teach one of my favorite concepts about the Exodus, and it's about Joseph's bones. And it is prophetic. It is incredibly prophetic. What it's prophetic of is three completely different things, but they're all gatherings. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And so the title of the teaching is Bring Up My Bones. And actually, this is a prayer that we should pray. Bring up my bones. Because it's about a lot of different things. It's about, like in the resurrection. Lord, bring up my bones in the resurrection. It's a promise of the resurrection. Bring up my bones like from being beat down and low and in the ground to being alive and strong and healthy and that sort of thing. And then bring up my bones back to Israel. And really that's what this is about. So we're going to look at this act that took place that was really an act that was a pattern or a picture or a model of something prophetic in the future. Exodus chapter 13. It came to pass, Paro, in sending the people, I have to say something about this. The name of the Torah portion is B'shelach. And everybody translates these passages as let the people go. It does not say that in Hebrew. It never says let the people go. I know it sounds cool. Let my people go. It sounds really cool. But it's not biblical. It's send the people. Send my people. Shalach, it's the word for apostle. To be sent out, a sent one. So that's how I have it translated, and that's how I'm going to read it. And it came to pass, Paro, in sending the people, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near, for God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by way of the wilderness to the Reed Sea, and the sons of Israel were armed. Literally, it says in Hebrew, in fives, which could be, the rabbis say it's like 1 out of 5 went, or 1 out of 50 went, when going up from the land of Egypt. And Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him. This is what I'm going to be talking about. For he beswore the sons of Israel to swear, saying, God in visiting will visit you, and you shall bring up my bones from here with you. That's all we're going to look at in the Torah portion. But this is huge. There are 19 slides on this presentation. So there are two, I don't know if you caught it, but there are two words that are repeated twice. He says that he beswore the sons of Israel to swear. We're going to look at that. And then it says, God in visiting will visit you. So these two words are repeated twice, and we're going to talk about why. I'm going to show you how important this is. Now this is about the double oath, or the word swear or oath or vow, the double oath of Joseph's bones. We're going to look at this passage. And Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, and he beswore the sons of Israel to swear, saying, you shall bring up my bones from here with you. So earlier on, back in Genesis, Joseph had made his brothers, not his children, his brothers, who were all going to die in Egypt, to swear to Joseph that they would take his bones up to Israel. So this was a promise. This was basically saying, guys, you're going to leave this place, Egypt, and you're going to go back to Canaan, back to Israel. And my bones are like that promise. You can actually physically see this promise that you're going to go back up, and you're going to carry my bones with you. So it was prophetic. Back in Genesis 50, it says in verse 24 and 25, this is the story about him saying that. Now in the Hebrew, in our passage in Exodus 13, it says, Hashbeah Hishbiah. Sounds almost exactly the same. Hashbeah Hishbiah. And it is written exactly the same. Hey, Shin, Vav, Ayin. But it's pronounced slightly different, both words. Hashbeah, the swearing, Hishbiah, to swear. So it's the same word, but it's said twice. Now in the Bible, if you have the same word twice, it's not exactly like it is in Spanish and Greek and other languages, where they'll repeat a word for emphasis. Like when my wife and I, before we got married, my wife, Eileen, she had written a shopping list of all the things that she wanted in a man. And one of them was strong arms. But she had gotten to the end of the paper. She had like 80 of them. And she got to the end of the paper, and so she went to the next paper, and so it said strong, and then the next paper said strong arms. So I've always made fun of her and said, yes, she wanted a guy with strong, strong arms. Well, that's how it works in Spanish. Like you'll say strong, strong, and that means very strong. Sometimes it is like that in Hebrew, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's spiritual, because this is a spiritual book, and it's a spiritual language. And so a lot of times the rabbis will say this word was repeated. Why? Because one is for now and one is for later. And so it is with this hashbea, swear, beswore to swear. And here's the story of it. Joseph said to his brothers, I die, and God in visiting will visit you. And there's a repetition again. God in visiting will visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Joseph took an oath, Vayishba, of the children of Israel, saying, God in visiting will visit you. It says this twice. It says, in visiting will visit you twice. So there's 4 times that word is used in this passage, Genesis 50, which we're going to look at. But right now we're looking at the oath, the word shavua or hashba. So it says, Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God in visiting will visit you, and you shall carry my bones up from here, from Egypt. Now in Hebrew it says vayishba, and in Exodus it says hashbea, hishbia. So what is this word oath or vow or swear? The word is shava, from sheva or 7, literally the same word as 7. And it means to swear. Now, in our ridiculous Greek-based or Latin-based or whatever it is language, Greek-based I think it is, of English, nobody knows now what it means to swear. They think it's cussing. There's no such thing in Hebrew. It does not exist. There's no such thing as a cuss word in Hebrew. It doesn't exist. There's an imprecation like, may 1,000 fleas infest your hair. You know, that's an imprecation. But there's no such thing as swearing or cussing. It's a holy thing. In the Greek world, it's a horrible thing. But in the Jewish world, it's a magnificent, holy thing. And it's the word shava, which means 7. And why? Because it means literally to seven oneself. Why? Because they would repeat the declaration 7 times, or they would give 7 sacrifices and repeat the declaration 7 times. May my children do thus and such. And they'd say it over and over again and make a sacrifice. This is how serious it was. So swearing is not a small thing. It's a huge thing. And so however he did it, he made the children, his brothers, the children of Israel, swear that they would take his bones up. But they're going to die. They're all going to die in Egypt. So what does that mean? I guess the vow dies with them, and the whole thing is just, a failed attempt, and it just kind of dies. But really, it's not only established, but established twice. Once for then, and once for in the future. I'm going to show you this. So the oath being twice, hashbea, hashbia, in Exodus 13, means that one vow was for that time, for when they go up from Egypt and they carry his bones up to Israel, and then again in the future. So let's look at the other word that's repeated twice. In visiting will visit. This is amazing. God in visiting will visit you. In Hebrew it's pakad yifkod. And the root we'll talk about is pakad. Pakad yifkod, in visiting will visit you. And you shall bring up my bones from here with you. So this is very important. Not only does he make them swear, but he says 4 times. He says 4 times this word. In visiting, God will visit you. In visiting, God will visit you. That's in Genesis 50. And now it's again 2 times in Exodus 13. This is really important. So this is not a small thing. It is prophetic. Now, I was playing around earlier, and I said this, and I bet you this will capture your attention. Today, my friends, we're going to study one of the most amazing prophetic passages in the Word of God. That being Joseph's bones. You know, my friends, now, this is the kind of thing that sucks people in. Usually, it's nonsense. This is so real and so right and so strong. I could teach this whole thing like that, in that silly Christian teacher voice. That should not attract you. It shouldn't. The things of Scripture, the Jewish world of Scripture, is so down to earth and real and emotional and stuff like that. There's no packaging of it in the Bible. It's very real. And so what I'm going to show you is that this visiting that God is going to do is it's down to earth. It's where the rubber hits the road. It's very, very real. And that's how prophecy is in the Jewish world, not in the Christian world. In the Christian world, prophecy is, I have a prophetic message for you today about America or some foolishness like that. Prophecy is about 100% of the time, 100% of the time, it's about the kingdom, about the day of the Lord. And so it is with this. It's very real, and it is coming soon. In Exodus, well, we'll read this again in Genesis 50. Joseph said to his brothers, I die, and God in visiting will visit you. Pakad yifkod. It's exactly the same words. And bring you out of this land to the land. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God in visiting will visit you. Pakad yifkod. He says it twice. And you shall carry up my bones from here. So this promise of God bringing the Jews to Israel in an Exodus is integrally tied to Joseph's bones. Now in Exodus 32, later on, it says God is speaking to Moshe, and this is after the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf. And Moshe says, I'm done with these people. I'm just done. I can't do this anymore. These people are just constantly sinning, and they won't listen to anything you say or I say about you. They're not listening. It's unbearable. And so God makes a promise of how he's going to deal with this. Therefore now, go, lead the people to the place of which I've spoken to you, being the land of Israel, but it's really the kingdom. You can see that in Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4. It's not Israel, it's the kingdom. Behold, my angel will go before you, and in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And what it says in Hebrew is, pakdi ufakditi. Ufakadti. Pakdi ufakadti. It's hard to say. Ufakadti. 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 Pakdi ufakadti. And it's the same root twice. Pakad. When we first got married and we were having our first kid, I said, oh, Eileen, I know what I want to name him if he's a boy. What do you want to name him, honey? Pikud. Because this word visit, I knew it was about the day of the Lord. I knew it was a promise of the coming kingdom and about the birth pangs and about all the day of the Lord. And so I wanted to name my kid Pikud. And she said, over my supine form. So we didn't name the child Pakad, Pikud, and it was a girl anyway. But I've always loved this word for 35 years. So the word is pakad. It's a primitive root, and it means to strike upon or strike against any person or thing, to visit. It really means to visit. To visit with friendly or hostile intent. It could be either one. By analogy, to oversee, to muster, to charge, to care for, to avenge, to bestow, to appoint. to give a charge, to commit, to count. It's got a lot of meanings, but they all are basically the same thing. They're an overseer. There's somebody over something or somebody else. And so it's a visit, like God coming to visit for either good or for bad. And that's what the day of the Lord is. It's a visit of God. It is the next visit of God for good and for bad. Starts out bad, then gets really good. So it says it twice. In visiting, we'll visit you. In visiting, we'll visit you. And it also says it twice in Exodus 32:34. And by the way, there are other ways to say this in Hebrew. You don't have to say the word twice. But God says, when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. So it's always twice, at least here in these passages. Why twice? One for that time and one for the future. So this is a promise. It is a prophetic pattern or shadow picture of the future judgment of God. Those words are awful, but it's true. Those are true. It's a picture, it's a pattern of the future day of the Lord when God visits the world. And it's going to happen soon. It's going to happen soon. So here's a picture. This is not one that I did. And so if somebody did this out in the universe and sees this on YouTube, please don't sue me or on Facebook. I couldn't find any good pictures of them carrying Joseph's bones up, and I didn't have time to do one myself. So this is the best I could find. It's pretty good. Not bad. But I want you to have in your mind them carrying Joseph's bones up. And remember, he was embalmed in Egypt. So it's going to look Egyptian. It's going to look like a mummy. This is not good. It's bad. They gutted Joseph. They gutted him. They took all his vital organs out and left his shell. That's how mummification works, which is not a good thing. So let's look at the passage again. Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, for he being Joseph, beswore the sons of Israel to swear, saying, you shall bring up my bones from here with you. Now, this is a commentary from Rashi, and it's amazing, but it's really hard to follow if you don't know how to read this stuff. So I might have to interpret it for you. Woe to us, who to us had a greater burial than Joseph? As it was none other than Moshe who involved himself in transporting his coffin. Moshe merited to be the only person involved in the transportation of Joseph's bones to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. That sounds contradictory to the vow, doesn't it? Joseph said, brothers, you're going to swear to me that you all are going to carry my bones up. But this commentary is saying that Moshe was the only one who merited to carry the bones up. Sounds contradictory. Let's keep reading. And there was none among the Jewish people greater than he, greater than Moshe, as it is stated, and Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him. Now that's why Rashi says this, because it literally says, lo, with him. With who? With Moshe. Not with the sons of Israel, with him only. In other words, the merit was like put on his account. The merit of carrying, fulfilling that vow, and the merit of taking the bones up to the Holy Land was written or a charge to Moshe's account. That's what it's saying. Who had a greater burial than Moshe? I thought it said, who had a greater burial than Joseph? That's how it started. Who to us had a greater burial than Joseph? Because it was none other than Moses involved himself in transporting the coffin. But now it's saying, who had a greater burial than Moses? As no one involved himself in his burial. Nobody involved himself in his burial except God himself. So what it's saying is that Moshe had the greatest burial of all, because God's the one who did it. And so Moshe, who God himself buried, was the one who merited to take up the bones of Joseph. That's what it's saying so far. As it is stated, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab over against Bet Peor, and nobody knows of his grave to this day. The Mishnah comments, not only with regard to Moshe did the sages say that God takes part in his burial. In other words, nobody knows who buried, like where Moshe's burial place is, because God himself took place in his burial. Only God. But the sages say that God takes part in his burial, but also with regard to all the righteous. In other words, God buries all the righteous. And Moshe is a picture of all the righteous. As it is said, your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall gather you in. Now, if you read that in any Bible, it does not say that. It says, I'm going to say it. Please don't think I'm mocking. I'm not. I'm not mocking anybody. I just want you to hear it in the Christian schema. I want you to hear it because you've heard it before. Your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. You've heard that, right? It doesn't say that in Hebrew at all. It says what Rashi says. It says, your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall gather you in. This is why he's saying it's a burial. Because we're going to look at this word, gather you in, gather you to your fathers. It says it all over the Old Testament. And David was gathered to his fathers, and Solomon was gathered to his fathers, and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were gathered to their people, and Joseph was gathered to his people. It says it over and over and over again. Gathered. Why? Why does it say the word gathered? Why? Because that's the resurrection. The gathering is the resurrection. And so to die in Judaism is magnificent. To die means you're being gathered to that group of people that are going to be gathered to God. And God is involved in your burial and your death. If you're righteous, God is involved in our burial and our death because he's going to gather us together. Now that is what Judaism teaches. I don't know what they teach in Christianity anymore. I've gotten so far from it. And you might think that's a bad thing. I don't. But in Judaism, that's the picture that's painted for us. That we're gathered to this group of people that are going to be gathered to God. So the Exodus with Joseph's bones is a picture of the second Exodus that I've been talking about for 3 weeks. The second Exodus, or gathering. So let's look at this concept of being gathered to your people. And the verse that we're looking at is, and Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Why did Moses take the bones of Joseph with him? And Moses, like it's put on his account, because he's a picture of God gathering all the righteous. Joseph's bones is a picture of that. So Joseph's bones is not just a small thing. This is a huge thing. It's a promise of the resurrection. What you might call, please forgive me for this, foolishly. It's a foolish way to say it. And all it does is twist your mind in the wrong direction. You might foolishly call it the rapture. It is not called the rapture in the Bible. It's called the resurrection. And Joseph's bones is a picture of that resurrection, but only in it being carried up by Moshe. Now Isaiah 58:8, the one that Rashi quotes, says, "Then your light will break out like dawn. Your recovery will spring forth, and your righteousness go before you. The glory of the Lord will gather you." And it says in Hebrew, Ya'asfecha. And the root is asaf. Asaf. It's a primitive root which means to scrape or to scrape together. To scrape things together. It's a gathering. It's a bringing stuff together. To gather, to collect, to assemble, to bring, to consume, to destroy, to gather in. Now it's translated in King James as re-reward. I don't even know what that means, but it even has that in the Jusinius under Asaph, or at least in Strong's concordance under Asaph. It says in quotes re-reward. I don't even know what that means, but that's how it's translated in King James Bible. It is not re-reward or rearward or rear guard, as some people say. It is collection. Think about this. The glory of the Lord will gather you? Why would we, as believers, have our mind on this world? Why? There's nothing here. We are waiting for us to be gathered to God himself. He's going to physically, whatever this means, I don't know what it means, but whatever it means, he's going to physically come to earth to gather us. That's what it says in the scriptures. That God will appear and come to earth to gather us together. Now the word Asaph, I mean, who's in this coffin? Yosef. It's the same word. It's the same word. Yosef means, it's from Asaph. And they'll say that it means, and I've said it too, to add, like he shall add. Not what it means. It means he shall gather. He shall gather. And so Joseph's bones are being gathered by who? Moshe. The most righteous guy who God himself buried. And so it's a picture of God himself gathering all the righteous together. Genesis 49:29 says, I will be gathered to my people. Ne'asaph. Genesis 49:33, this is talking about Yosef. He was gathered to his people. Ye'asaph. Same word. Numbers 20:24, Aaron was gathered to his people. Ye'asaph. Numbers 27:13, and you will be gathered to your people. Te'asaph. Now this is talking to Moshe. You will be gathered to your people. Te'asaph. Numbers 31:2, talking to Moshe. Afterward, after you take vengeance on Midian, you will be gathered to your people. And it says ne'esafta. Same word. These are all just different forms of the same word. 2 Kings 22:20, then I will gather you to your people. Ospech, sorry. You will be gathered, same guy, same words, but it's later on in the verse. You will be gathered to your people. Ne'esafta. Now it says it twice, which means one for then, one for the future. Isaiah 24:22, they will be gathered as prisoners are gathered. Ve'usfu asefa. Says it twice. Now this is talking about bad guys being gathered for a bad purpose. And it says it twice. What does that tell you? That it's once for the present and once for the future. Being gathered occurs twice. At the death and then when God visits. Now we saw that amazing verse in Exodus 32:34 when God is talking about, when Moshe is talking about the sin of the golden calf. And God says, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin on them. This is an amazing verse. And it's a prophecy about the day of the Lord. It's a prophecy specifically about the birth pangs in the day of the Lord. It's a prophecy more specifically about the last year of the birth pangs in the day of the Lord. It's a prophecy more specifically about Yom Kippur in the last year of the birth pangs in the day of the Lord. So it happens twice. The word asaph happens twice. You're gathered at death, and then you're gathered when God visits. Okay. Now here's another commentary by Rashi, and this one's probably even harder to follow. What we're looking at is, and Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him, for he beswore the sons of Israel to swear, Hashbea, saying, God in visiting will visit you, Pakad Yifkod, and you shall bring up my bones from here. Now, Rashi says this, for he had beswore, to swear. The double expression indicates that he, Yosef, had made them, his brothers, swear that they would make their children swear. Oh, there's our answer. He knows his brothers are all going to die in Egypt. He knows they're not going to go. In fact, he knows when they're going to go out of Egypt because there's been a promise. And the promise was made to Abraham, and Abraham taught it to Isaac, and Isaac taught it to Jacob, and Jacob taught it to his 12 sons. And the promise was this: you shall be strangers in a land not yours for 400 years, and then you will go out with great possessions. Now that promise was made 430 years to the day before they left Egypt. It was made to Abraham. So they were not slaves for 430 years, but they could count the years from the day that promise was made. 430 years later, to the day, they would leave Egypt. And Joseph knows this. And Joseph knows that his brothers are going to die. So why make them swear? Because it's a double vow. He makes two vows. It says it twice. Hashbeya, hashbiya. Vow, vow. And that means that they would make their children make the same vow. And so it's one for now, one for the future. That's what Rashi's saying. He made them, his brothers, swear that they would make their children swear. This is according to Mechilta, which is an ancient commentary, an ancient book of pictures and stories. Now, why did he not make his sons swear to carry... why didn't he make his sons do it? Ephraim and Manasseh. Why didn't he just have Ephraim and Manasseh swear? Why didn't he have his sons swear to carry him to the land of Canaan immediately, right then, after he died? Because that's what happened to Jacob, as Jacob had made him swear, made Joseph swear. That's what happened with Joseph, so why not do the same thing with his kids? Joseph said, I was a ruler in Egypt, and I had the ability to do this. As for my sons, the Egyptians will not let them do it. In other words, he knows that it's going to turn bad. He knows they're going to end up as slaves. They weren't slaves then, when Joseph was around, but he knows that they're going to become slaves, and it's going to get bad for the Jews. So he says, as for my kids, the Egyptians won't let them do it. Therefore he made them swear that when they would be redeemed and would leave Egypt, they would carry him out. Now that is pretty amazing to me, that Mechilta, we'll just call it the sages, and Rashi all saw that this was a prophetic of the future. And the details of the words make it detailed in its prophecy of the future. I love this. So, this is why I named the title of the teaching, Bring Up My Bones. Because that's what Joseph made them swear. You will bring up my bones. And he said, guys, bring up my bones. And that's the prophecy. So, there's three of them. There's three. This has three applications. Bring up my bones in the future. Because it's going to happen in, a couple hundred years from now. 230 years. Bring up my bones in the future. My bones are going to be brought up in the resurrection. And then there's going to be a second Exodus in which I want you to bring up my bones. So here's the three bones going up. Number one, there's a gathering. Now remember, this is all gathering. You'll be gathered to your fathers, gathered to your fathers, gathered to your fathers, gathered to your fathers. Over and over and over again. He said it to everybody. So the gathering is, the first one is the resurrection. The second gathering is the regathering of Israel, which is the second Exodus. You think the Exodus of 1.5 million people, or however many it was, coming out of Egypt was amazing and fantastic, and they make movies about it? Nothing compared to the second Exodus that is going to happen in the day of the Lord, when God himself brings the Jewish people back home. We're going to look at it. And the third one, what the church foolishly, you'll forgive me saying this, but if you say it, it is foolish, call it Armageddon. It's not Armageddon. But I'll talk more about that. But the third gathering is the gathering of the enemy, specifically for destruction. And this is the one I really want to focus on for you, because if you're worried about COVID, and you're worried about the elections, and you're worried about communism and socialism coming to America, and you're worried about them shutting down the congregations, and you're worried about the fact that we can't get together to worship together, and we can't be together as people, and you're worried about these things, just know this: it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's not getting better. It's not going to get better. It's not. And the reason is God has to bring all the bad guys together against God. He has to pack them all into one place. That only happens if things get worse, guys. It has to get worse in order for God to gather together all the bad guys so he can wipe them out. All right, that's the third one. It's not Armageddon. We'll talk more about it, but I'm just going to call it Armageddon so you can know what I'm saying. Here's the first one, the gathering of redemption, the resurrection. Now, I want you to know that there are like 15 more slides about number 1, number 2, and number 3. I got lots of slides and lots of scriptures, but there are only a lot of them because I wrote them all out for you. I've written them all out for you. But I want you to know that these are not all of them. These are just most of them. They're not all of them. I couldn't fit all of them. It would take too long. But the verses that I've chosen are verses that very clearly in Judaism, in ancient Judaism, amongst the sages and the rabbis and the commentators of the Bible, in Judaism, see these as pictures of whatever gathering we're looking at, either the resurrection, the second Exodus, or Armageddon. They say that these verses apply, not me. Psalm 47, 7 through 9. God is king of all the earth. You should already know when this is read. When is God king? He's proclaimed as king on Rosh Hashanah. God is king of all the earth. Sing praises. God reigns over the heathen. God sits on the throne of his holiness. The princes of the people are gathered together. The people of the God of Abraham. This is not talking about getting together for services. This is talking about God gathering his people. You shall be gathered to your people. Gathering Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moshe, Aaron, all the righteous together. When? On Rosh Hashanah. This is read at Rosh Hashanah. When does the resurrection take place in Judaism? At Rosh Hashanah. So this is a prophecy of the resurrection at Rosh Hashanah. Ezra 3:1. Now when the 7th month came, when did the 7th month come? What day does it come? On the 1st of the 7th month, Rosh Hashanah. Now on Rosh Hashanah, the sons of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered together as one man. I think this is amazing. This is just my opinion. You can take this or leave it, but I think it is not wise to say the phrase body of Christ. I don't think it's wise. I think that it makes your mind think differently about what the scriptures, the picture that the scriptures paint for you. The reason is, it's a Jewish body. It's a Jewish body. Israel is that body. It's one man. It's one body. And here's one of the verses that say that the people, well, who were the people? The Jews. Israel, Jews, were gathered together as one man. And in the resurrection, the Messiah is going to gather his people, his body, from Adam all the way through whoever is a believer. All the righteous are going to be gathered together as one human being, as one man, like pictorially as a human being. The body of Messiah. That's the body of Messiah. Not the body of Christ, the body of Messiah. And they are very, very, very different, at least in our brains. Now, if you've released yourself from that difference and you've found some way to magically not have Christ painted in your mind the way 1,000 generations have, in every picture and painting and sculpture and book and writing and speaking and teaching. Now, if you found a way to magically divorce yourself from that, you are amazing. I've been doing this, and I'm a Jew, and I've been doing it for 42 years, and I still have trouble doing it. So I don't know how you did it, but teach the rest of us, because it ain't working. It ain't working, at least from what I've seen. So I just don't think it's a wise idea to say body of Christ. Say body of Messiah. And I think you might start picturing it the way the Bible pictures it as a Jew. It's a Jewish body. Now, this is amazing. In Nehemiah chapter 8, which is 100 years later, after the book of Ezra, 100 years later, same exact thing happens. And when the 7th month came, that's Rosh Hashanah, the sons of Israel were in their cities, and all the people gathered as one man at the public square which was in front of the water gate. This is amazing. 100 years later, same exact picture, same exact event, same exact timing, same exact thing happens as a picture of the resurrection of the Jewish, well, I'll say all the righteous in the day of the Lord. Now, you might picture the rapture. If you do, I'm hoping by the end of this that you'll picture it a little differently. Isaiah 17, 4 through 6. Now, in that day, we're in the day of the Lord. In that day, in the day of the Lord, the glory of Jacob will fade, and the fatness of his flesh will become lean. It will become like the reaper gathering the standing grain, and his arm harvests the ears. Now, for years, when I read this, I was like, oh, there's like people dying. It's not what it is. It's not what it is. The fatness of his flesh, of Jacob, of Israel, will become lean. It's talking about a human body getting skinny, right? It will be like the reaper gathering the standing grain. This is the resurrection. So I'm going to say it in Christian terminology so you can understand. When the rapture happens, a whole bunch of people are going to disappear. That's what it's saying. You might recognize when Yeshua said, one will be taken and the other left. One will be in the field and one will be taken and another left. That's basically what Yeshua is quoting. He's quoting all the verses in the Bible that talk about the disappearing, the removal, I'm going to say the destruction of all these people. And they are destroyed. We are going to be destroyed. Our body is going to literally be blown to molecules in the resurrection. So you could describe it like that, as a destruction. That's what it's describing. The fatness of his flesh will become lean. He's going to get skinny, less people in that body. It will be like the reaper gathering the standing grain as his arm harvests the ears. This is harvesting. This is the resurrection. God taking his grain back. Or it will be like one gleaning ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Now this is important. The valley of Rephaim is near Jerusalem. There is no grain in the valley of Rephaim. This is the same valley that later on is called the valley of Jehoshaphat. Yah, he judges. It is the valley of judgment where God is going to judge. We're going to see it. So that's where this takes place, the valley of Rephaim. Guess what's in the valley of Rephaim these days for the last 3,000 years? The graves of the righteous. That's where they're all buried, in the valley of Rephaim. Mount of Olives has a slope that goes down to the valley of Kidron. That's the valley of Rephaim. The valley of Kidron turns into the valley of Rephaim. Yet gleanings will be left in it. So there's few people left. Gleanings will be left in it like the shaking of an olive tree. The olive tree is Israel. You shake it and all those olives come down, but there's still some left. 2 or 3 olives in the topmost branch, 4 or 5 on the branches of the fruitful tree. So this is the resurrection, leaving other Jews on earth. Isaiah 40, 10 through 11. Behold, the Lord God will come with might, with his arm ruling for him. His reward is before him. Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. In his arm, he will gather, there's that word gather the lambs. And by the way, every verse I'm showing you has the word osef, gather in it. He will gather the lambs and carry them in the folds of his robe. He will gently lead the nursing ewes. This is the resurrection. Picture the rapture, if you have to. Picture it like this. That God is going to gather his lambs like a shepherd and gently lead us to heaven. Zephaniah 2, 1 through 3. I love this verse. Yes, join together. Gather yourselves together. Gather yourselves together. Yes, join together, you nation without shame. It doesn't mean like in Spanish, Ay, no sinvergüenza. You have no shame. Doesn't mean that. It means they have no shame. They're without shame. All their shame has been taken away. They're happy. Nation without shame, before the decree takes effect, the day passes like chaff, before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you. What is he saying? He's saying resurrect before the birth pangs really hit. Because at Rosh Hashanah, the year 6001, when the shofar is blown and the resurrection takes place, that's when the birth pangs start. Right then. But the resurrection takes place a few moments before the birth pangs really kick in. Before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you, seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth, who have practiced his judgments. In other words, done Judaism. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. Hidden where? In heaven. That's where we're hidden. Mark 13:27. This is absolutely amazing in Greek. And it is horrible in every translation that has ever been translated. But in Greek, it's awesome. Because it says, Jewish phrase, Jewish phrase, Jewish phrase. And they're all gutted from the translations. I don't know what it says in English. I translated it properly here, so I'm just going to read this. The affliction, and it's the word, in Hebrew is tsar, or the birth pangs. The birth pangs in the acharit yamim, in the latter days. That is amazing. It doesn't say anything like that in English. But it says in the Greek, the affliction, the birth pangs, the tsar, in the acharit yamim. The sun will be darkened, the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken, and they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send forth the angels and will osef, gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of heaven.
That starts in verse 24.
Starts in verse 24. Thank you, Doug. So it goes 24 through 27, I suppose. All right, very good. This is amazing. The birth pangs in the Acharit Yamin, and then he describes it and he talks about the resurrection. All right, 1 Thessalonians 4:17 through 18. For the Lord will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the angel, and with the shofar of God, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. Then we who are alive, who remain, will be snatched to them together. This is where they get the word rapture from, the word snatched. I checked it in Greek. Raptier is Latin, actually. But what it says is, this is gathering. This is the word gathering. Snatched to them together is what it says. Will be gathered together in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So I have this verse, even though it doesn't say in English gathering, I have it here because it says snatched to them together. That's a gathering. And then in 2 Thessalonians 2:1 through 2, describing or referring back to 1 Thessalonians 4 about the resurrection, he calls it here a gathering. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, regarding the coming of our Lord Yeshua to the Messiah and our gathering together to him. They are two separate things. The coming of the Lord Yeshua to earth is not the rapture. The coming of the Lord to earth is separate from our gathering to him, which is the resurrection. They are separate things. One, the resurrection happens at Rosh Hashanah, and the other, the Lord physically coming to earth, is Yom Kippur. They're two separate things. And he says, concerning these two separate things, I don't want you to be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter saying that the day of the Lord, not the Lord, the day of the Lord has come. I guess his letter didn't work because everybody in the church is shaken from their composure because they don't know that the resurrection, the birth pangs, the literal coming of the Lord to earth, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, the sealing for redemption, the heavenly way, they don't know any of these Jewish concepts. And so they are shaken from their composure. And they mush them all together into a big mush and then go, oh my God, what's going to happen? Could happen any day. No, it cannot. All right, that's the resurrection. That's number one. Now number two, the second gathering is actually a regathering. And it is the second Exodus. This is what I've been talking about for 3 weeks. Now we're really going to look at it. I haven't really looked at it. I've just mentioned it. I've just kind of talked about it. But now we're going to read about it and see where God describes for us this second Exodus. You think the first Exodus was amazing? The second Exodus is going to be twice as amazing. Now, if we go in the resurrection, we may or may not see it. But this is, and by the way, the Jews also mushed together all these Jewish concepts of the day of the Lord and the coming of the Messiah and the birth pangs and the coming of God to earth and all this stuff. They mushed it together too. And so they also have a mushy, unclear view of what's coming. But Israel, this message is coming from Israel every day, clearer and clearer, that you need to not worry because God is going to bring the second Exodus, and it's going to be amazing. And he's going to judge all sin on earth, and it's going to be amazing. But it's going to be terrifying too. All right, so number two, the second Exodus. Psalm 107, 1 through 6. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Hodu Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasdo. For his mercy is everlasting. The redeemed of the Lord shall say so, those whom he has redeemed from the hand of the enemy and has gathered from the east and from the west and from the north and from the south. This is not talking about the past, because the Jews never were gathered from the north and the south and the east and the west. Never. Never happened. But it's going to happen. Gathered from the east and the west and the north and the south. They wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. Then they cried out to the Lord in Tsar, in the birth pangs. This is talking about the birth pangs. They cried out to the Lord during the Tsar, and he saved them from their distress. And he brought them back during the birth pangs from the north and the south and the east and the west. This is what's coming. Isaiah 27:12. In that day, we're already in the day of the Lord. In that day, the Lord will thresh from the flowing stream of the Euphrates River to the brook of Egypt. The brook of Egypt is not the Nile. The brook of Egypt is a river, the Nahal Mitzrayim, that is basically a border between Israel and Egypt. And it's up at the top of the Sinai Peninsula. It's the southern border of Israel. So he will start his threshing from the flowing stream of the Euphrates River to the brook of Egypt, and you will be gathered up one by one. Now you'd think this is talking about the resurrection. Yeah, it might be. But it's also talking about the second Exodus, and I'm going to show you why we know that. It will come about also in that day, that a great shofar will be blown. Now the great shofar is Yom Kippur. That puts it at Yom Kippur. And those who were perishing in the land of Assyria, and those who were scattered in the land of Egypt, will come and worship the Lord on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. Where are they coming from? Assyria and Egypt. So it might be that in this passage it has the resurrection and then the second Exodus. Maybe. Or they might be referring both to the second Exodus. I don't have a problem with either one. And they were scattered in the land of Egypt, and they were perishing in the land of Assyria. So that's how we know it's about the second Exodus, because they're coming from other lands back to Israel. Isaiah 43, 1 through 9. Since you are precious in my sight, since you are honored, and I love you, I will give people in your place and nations in exchange for your life. Don't be afraid. This is what I would say to you. don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't be afraid of the vaccine. Don't be afraid of the one world government and all the other catchphrases that are out there. Don't be afraid of any of it. Because I will bring your seed from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, don't hold them back. Bring my sons, my children from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, both Jew and Gentile. Now, in the Exodus, the first Exodus, wasn't it just Jews? No, it was not. It said that who went up with them? A mixed multitude. A mixed multitude. That's Gentiles. Thousands and thousands and thousands of them went up in the Exodus. And let's see, to the south, don't hold it back. Bring my sons from afar, my daughters from the ends of the earth. So they're coming from different lands. That's how we know this is the Exodus, second Exodus. Everyone who is called by my name, and whom I have created for my glory, whom I have formed, even whom I have made. Bring out the people who are blind, even though they have eyes, and those who are deaf, even though they have ears. That's Israel. All the Gentiles have gathered together so that the peoples may be assembled. Now, right at the end of this passage, when it says, so all the Gentiles have gathered together, this is the third one. This is bringing all the Gentiles together to kill them, to wipe them out. This is the third. This is number 3. Right now we're looking at number 2, the second Exodus. So he's going to gather all of the righteous from the north and the south and the east and the west to bring them back to the land of Israel. Isaiah 49, 11 through 13, and then verse 18. I will make all my mountains a road, and my highways will be raised up. Behold, these will come from afar. And behold, these come from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Aswan. That's Egypt. You know, there's still an Aswan Dam in Egypt. So this is talking about Egypt. That's the south. Shout for joy, you heavens, and rejoice, you earth. The Lord will have compassion on his afflicted. Your destroyers and devastators will leave you. Raise your eyes and look around, all of them together. They come to you. You will certainly put them on as jewelry and bind them on as a bride. Now this gets a little confusing. In this passage, in Isaiah 49, it says a whole lot more than what I have here, and it's talking to the Messiah. And it literally says to him, to the Messiah, you are going to gather all my people back. And then he says, it's very strange how God says it to the Messiah. He says, is it a little thing for you that you're going to bring them all back? Is it a small thing in your sight that you're going to rule over the world? It's very strange. And then it says this part about the second Exodus. And it says back again to the Messiah, raise your eyes and look around. All of them will gather together. They come to you. You will certainly put them on as jewelry and bind them on as a bride. Now this is talking about 2 different things. This is talking about number 1, the resurrection. The righteous will go in the resurrection, be gathered to the Messiah in heaven, not on earth. Go up to heaven, and he will, in essence, put the righteous on as adornment, as jewelry. This is part of this is part of the dowry in a Jewish wedding. That the bride gives jewelry and stuff to the groom, and the groom gives jewelry and stuff to the bride. So that's what it's talking about here. And it's also talking about the second Exodus. Now, Isaiah 56, 7 through 8. Even them, this is talking to Gentiles, I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offering and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. Gentiles' burnt offering and sacrifices will be accepted on the altar, the Jewish temple with the Jewish altar, and all the Jews are all over everywhere. And the Jewish sacrifices, yeah, they're going to join to the Jews and do Judaism. And it'll be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all people. Not the way you want it to be. Not with Christianity. It's going to be a house of prayer a God's house of prayer with a Jewish temple, Jewish sacrifices, Jewish altar, with filled and surrounded and formed by Judaism. For all the nations. That puts it in the day of the Lord. The Lord God, which gathers the outcasts of Israel, says, "Yet I will gather others to him." Ooh, who's that? That's the Gentiles. Besides those that are gathered into him. That's an amazing passage. All about the Gentiles being gathered to the Jews in the day of the Lord. This is the second Exodus, and like I said, there was a mixed multitude that went up with the Jews out of Egypt. Jeremiah 3, verse 17, "At that time they shall call Jerusalem the throne of the Lord, and all the Gentiles will be gathered to it." There it is again. "To the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem. Neither shall they walk any more after the imagination of their evil heart." Now this is part of the second Exodus. Let me say it this way. The second Exodus is, it happens in shifts, in chunks. Like the first one, all the Jews will be gathered from all the lands, and they'll come back. It'll be absolutely phenomenal, with miracles, with whole oceans parting. It's just going to be amazing in the birth pangs. And then later on, there's going to be another group that come, and they're Gentiles. And then after the birth pangs, there's going to be another Exodus of all the Gentiles coming up to Jerusalem to worship, finally. And it will be called a house of prayer for all the nations. Jeremiah 23:3, "Then I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries." So it puts it physical, on earth, "out of all the countries where I have driven them, and bring them back to their pasture, and they will be fruitful and multiply." That's the second Exodus. Now you're going to look at all these verses in Jeremiah. Jeremiah 3, 23, 29, 31, 32. And then there's just as many in Ezekiel about the second Exodus. 29:14, "I will let myself be found by you. I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you. And I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile." I'm going to bring you back to Jerusalem, back to Israel. Jeremiah 31, "Save your people, the remnant of Israel. Behold, I am bringing them from the north country. Will gather them from the remote parts of the earth. Together they will return here as a great assembly. They will come with weeping. They won't stumble. He who scattered Israel will gather him." Osepho. He who scattered him will gather him. They will come and shout for joy in the height of Zion. Now, I want you to understand, I didn't know there were all these verses about the second Exodus. And these are not all of them. These are most of them, but it's not all of them. I didn't even realize how many verses there were about the second Exodus. I knew it was going to be great, but I didn't know how great. Jeremiah 32:37, "Behold, I am going to gather them out of all the lands to which I have driven them, in my anger and my wrath and my great indignation, and I'll bring them back to this place and have them live in safety." Ezekiel 11:17, "This is what the Lord God says, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you from the countries among which you have been scattered and give you the land of Israel." This has not happened. Don't think that this has happened, that, the Jews have gone back to Israel. No, they have not. There's still more Jews in America than there are in Israel, and we're in every nation on earth. This has not happened. Ezekiel 20, verse 34, "As I live." Now look at this. Look at this. God says over and over again about the first Exodus from Egypt, "I will redeem you with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm." Well, now he says it specifically, those words, about the second Exodus. "As I live, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and wrath poured out, I assuredly will be king over you." This hasn't happened. "I will bring you out from the peoples and gather you from the lands where you are scattered, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out." He says it twice. Why do you think he says it twice? Once for the past, once for the future. There's a second Exodus. Look at all these. Ezekiel 28, 34, 36, 37, 39. A lot of verses in Ezekiel about the second Exodus. When I have gathered the house of Israel from the people among whom they are scattered. 28, 25. 34, 13. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and bring them to their own land. 36, 24. I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the lands, and I will bring you into your own land. Don't tell me this has happened. This has not happened. We've seen the tip of the iceberg of the Jews going back to Israel. We've seen a tiny, tiny fraction of how amazing and huge and magnificent this is going to be. But here's the thing. It happens during the birth pangs. Picture the Holocaust. And the Jews being kicked out of every nation or murdered in every nation. Now double it. That's the birth pangs. Double it. (37:21). I'm going to take the sons of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. Ezekiel 39. Now, Ezekiel 38 and 39 are about the third one, the bad one, quote, Armageddon. But in the midst of that passage in chapter 39, it also talks about the Exodus, the second Exodus. Here it is, 39, 27 through 28. When I have brought them again from the people and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and am sanctified in them in the sight of many nations, then they will know that I am the Lord their God, which caused them to be led into captivity among the Gentiles in the first place. I was the one who did it, God says. But I have gathered them to their own land and have left none of them any more there. This is in the midst of the passage about, quote, Armageddon. You understand what I'm saying? That the second Exodus comes in the birth pangs. Hosea 1:11. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together and appoint themselves one head. Who do you think that one head is? It's David. It says over and over again, it's David. It's the Messiah. He's called David in Ezekiel and Jeremiah 4 times. They will appoint themselves one head, David, which is really Yeshua. And they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Now this is interesting. This also puts it at Armageddon, because the valley of Jezreel runs next to Har Megiddo, which is Megiddo. Armageddon. That's where the word Armageddon comes from. So the valley of Jezreel is also the valley of Megiddo. They're the same thing. So again, we have the birth pangs joined with the second Exodus. Micah 2:12, I will certainly assemble all of you, Jacob. I will certainly gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like sheep in the fold, like a flock in the midst of its pasture. They will be noisy with people. So, I want you to understand that I only found all these verses because I looked up one word. What was the word? Oseph, gathered. Zephaniah 3:18 through 20. I will gather those who grieve for the appointed feasts. This could be Jews or Gentiles. They come from you, Zion. They came from you, Zion. The disgrace of exile is a burden on them. Behold, I am going to deal at that time with all your oppressors. I will save those who limp and gather the scattered. I will turn their shame into praise and fame in all the earth. At that time I will bring you in, even at the time when I gather you together. Indeed, I will make you famous and praiseworthy among all the peoples of the earth, when I restore your fortunes before your eyes. Now, I mean, the reason this is kind of fuzzy and muddy and confusing is because this takes time. The second Exodus takes several years, and there's a lot of horrible things that go along with it. Just as the Holocaust took years, and there were many, many thousands of events that took place in it. So it will be in Israel in the day of the Lord. That this return, this huge exodus during the birth pangs, it starts out horrible, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then it gets good. And so it's kind of like a timeline that changes over time. But at the end, it gets really, really good. Zephaniah 3:18, I love these verses, 18 through 20. I will gather those who grieve. So this is talking about, it starts out talking about out of Zion, and that's Jews and Gentiles, people who do Judaism, who know God, that they're grieving that they can't do Judaism. They're grieving over the festivals. They can't do it. And out of that group of people, the disgrace of exile is on them. And so God redeems them and brings them back. This is both Jews and Gentiles. This is the Jews and it's the mixed multitude going up, just like Joseph's bones, going up to Israel. Love those verses. All right, Zechariah 10, 6 through 11. I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph. I will bring them back because I had compassion on them. And they will be as though I had not rejected them. Ephraim will be like a warrior, and their heart will be joyful as if from wine. Indeed, their children will see and be joyful. I will whistle for them. Remember, I did this last week. I can't do that whistle. You know, when you call, I wish I could do that. But picture that, God going, come on, Jews! And Gentiles together. I will whistle for them and gather them together, for I have redeemed them. And they will be as numerous as they were before. When I scatter them among the peoples, they will remember me in distant countries. And they with their children will live and come back. I will bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. And I will bring them into the land of Gilad and Lebanon until no room can be found for them. This has not happened. And he will, by the way, Gilad is the Golan Heights. I've been there. There's plenty of room because Syria thinks they own it. Plenty of room there. I will bring them into the land of Gilad and Lebanon. We get Lebanon too, by the way, until no room can be found for them. And he will strike the waves in the sea so that all the depths of the Nile will dry up. He will strike the waves of the sea so that the depths of the Nile's not a sea, Nile's a river. Nahal. The sea is Yam. It's a different word. So he strikes the waves of the sea and the Nile dries up. I can't talk about it now, but I'm going to tell you this. The Euphrates is going to part, and the Jews are going to come back. The Nile is going to part, and the Jews are going to come back. The Mediterranean is going to part, and the Jews are going to come back. Something to think about. So this is going to be huge. But again, we're looking at the second exodus from Egypt. The second exodus from all the nations. And all you have to do is look up the word gather them together, or gather. And you're going to find many, many, many passages about it. All right, now we're going to come to number 3. This is what the world calls Armageddon. I'm going to say this again. It's a Greekicization, I guess, of the word of 2 words. Har Megiddo. Har Megiddo. Har means mountain. Megiddo, guess what it means? Gathering. It's the mountain of gathering. And Har Megiddo is next to a valley. The valley of Megiddo. This is where one of the great battles is going to take place in the birth pangs. Not the battle. There's more than one. But this is where, I'm not even going to say the biggest one. It's looked at as the biggest one because it's linked with the second Exodus. So it's a big, big, big event involving millions of people. Again, we're looking at Moses took the bones of Joseph. He beswore the sons of Israel to swear, saying, God in visiting will visit you, and you shall bring up my bones from here. The bones of Joseph going up to to Israel is when God visits. Well, when does God visit the earth? In the day of the Lord. Isaiah 13, 1 through 9. Love these verses too. Lift up a banner on the high mountain. Lift up the voice to them. This, by the way, is the resurrection. That they may go into the gates of the nobles. I have established my holy ones, called for my warriors. Now it shifts the camera angle, so to speak, from the resurrection and heaven, and now it looks at earth, and it looks at the holy ones coming down. And it literally says, coming down here. Called for my warriors to execute my anger. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, a noise of the kingdoms, of nations gathered together. This is why things are getting bad. God must gather the evil people together in one place. You must have a one world government. You must have all the evil people in unity. You got to gather them into one place so God can get rid of them all at the same time. A noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. Lord of hosts musters an army for battle. This tells us when this is. If you know the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, or at least familiar with the main passages, you know that the Lord is going to return on a white horse, followed by all the righteous on horses, and they all come back to do warfare. Well, that's fine. It's kind of like a baby story, but it's true. It is true. But it's kind of like telling a baby story. As we look at these passages, you're going to see much more detail about this. But that's basically what it is. It's Yom Kippur, at the end of the birth pangs, and God returning physically with his warriors to destroy all the evil. Now remember, I'm saying this happens in the day of the Lord. Nations gathered together. Lord of hosts musters an army for battle. They come from a far country. They being the warriors. They come from a far country. You know where that is? Heaven. From the end of heaven, even says it. Even the Lord, and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole earth. Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. This happens during the day of the Lord. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. And then after that it says, every man, why do I see every man with his hands on his loins like a woman in birth pangs? Their faces on fire. This is the birth pangs. Isaiah 24, 19 through 22. The earth is broken apart. The earth is split through. The earth is shaken violently. The earth trembles. Why? Because its sin is heavy on it. It will fall in that day, in the day of the Lord. The Lord will punish the host of high ones. Those are angels and spirits that are on high. This hasn't happened yet. Satan didn't fall with a third of the angels. That hasn't happened yet. It happens in the middle of the birth pangs. The Lord will visit, is what it says, visit the host of high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth on earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in the pit, and will be confined in prison. Now that has happened. And after many days, they will be visited, punished. Isaiah 34, 15 through 16. The tree snake will make its nest and lay eggs there. And it will hatch and gather under it. What is this talking about? This is talking about demons. We're told this in Revelation 18, that these birds that are listed here, I don't have the whole passage here, but the birds that are listed here are demons. And we're told they're demons, straight up, in Revelation chapter 18, about the destruction of Babylon. The tree snake will make its nest and lay eggs there. It's talking about Babylon. And it will hatch and gather under its protection. Yes, the hawks will be gathered. You know where Yeshua says, where the vultures are, there the bodies will be, or whatever, in Matthew and Luke. This is what he's quoting. Yes, the hawks will be gathered there, every one with its kind. Seek from the book of the Lord and read. You know where you're supposed to read? Leviticus chapter 11, where it lists all the birds. Not one of those will be missing. Not one of those will be missing. And they're all demons. None will lack its mate, for his mouth has spoken, and his spirit is the one who gathers them. God must gather the enemy for them to be destroyed. This is why things are getting worse. And they will continue to get worse, and worse, and worse, and worse, and worse. Jeremiah 25:33. And the slain of the Lord shall be in that day from one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented or gathered or buried. They shall be like dung upon the ground. Now this says the evil people, after they're slaughtered, will not be gathered. How are the righteous gathered? We're gathered to our fathers. That will not happen for them. They will not be gathered to their fathers. They will not be resurrected. This is not safe. They will not be saved. They will not be gathered. They will not be gathered to their fathers. Ezekiel 38. Now this is the passage, chapter 38 and 39, about, quote, Gog and Magog, which is about, quote, Armageddon. They're the same thing. So I'm just going to call it Armageddon. This is about Armageddon. After many days you will, Gog and Magog, be summoned. And we read this last week when we were looking at the Assyrian invasion in the day of the Lord as locusts. Same armies. In the latter years you will come into the land that is restored from the sword. Those gathered from many nations. That's number 2, the second Exodus. To the mountains of Israel. Its people were brought out from the Gentiles, and you will go up. You will come like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your troops. In that day, you will devise an evil plan, and you will say, I'm going to go up against the land. Those who live securely to capture spoils, and against the people who are gathered from the nations. In the second Exodus. Say to Gog, in that day, when my people are living securely, you will come up from your place, a mighty army, and you will come up against my people, Israel, like a cloud. So nations may know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes, Gog. Now what that means is God's going to slaughter them. And so all the world will fear God. That's what it means. Joel 3:2. When I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now this is Kidron, the Kidron Valley. You know that in Matthew 25, where it says over and over and over again, it's very repetitious. Yeshua says, depart from me, you wicked, and they're goats. And he says, enter your peace, enter your shalom, your rest, you good. And they're sheep, the sheep and the goats. And it says that this happens with him as judge. And it says to the wicked, you never fed me, you never clothed me, you never gave me drink, you never visited me in prison. And the wicked say, when did we see you thirsty? When did we see you hungry? When did we see you in prison? And we didn't visit you or feed you or clothe you or whatever. And he says, because you didn't do it to the least of my brothers, the Jews, my brothers, Israel, Yeshua's brothers, Israel. You didn't do that for... Now this is what he's quoting. This is one of the passages he's quoting. So it should say in this passage, in the valley of Jehoshaphat, it should say, I'm going to judge the bad guys for the way they treated Israel. It should say that. Let's see what it says. Joel 3:2. When I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations, all the Gentiles, and bring them down to the valley of judgment. Yehoshaphat. Yeh, or Yah, the name of God, Hu, or Ho, which is he, pointing he, Yah, he, Shaphat is judge. Now this is the Kidron Valley at Jerusalem. The Kidron Valley that turns into the Valley of Rephaim. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance, Israel. He comes right out and says it. This is what Yeshua was quoting in Matthew 25. at the judgment of the sheep and goats. And the bottom line, whether you believe this or you don't believe it, or you like it or you don't like it, or you can kind of, I think we should change the words, maybe massage the message a little bit. Whether you want to do that or not, the message is clear. All God cares about in his judgments on this world is how they treat the Jew, how they treat Israel. Period. And the birth pangs are all about God judging the world for how they treated the Jew. That's why it's there, to produce a baby, Yeshua. And the Jews are the ones who are going to produce that baby. So, Joel chapter 3 also, later on in chapter 3, 11 through 15. Come, all you surrounding Gentiles, gather yourselves here. Lord, bring down your warriors. This is amazing. Bring down your warriors. They're coming from heaven. It's Yom Kippur. It's Armageddon. It's God coming physically to earth with his warriors to destroy the wicked. Bring down your warriors. Let the nations be awakened and come up to the valley of Yehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all the surrounding Gentiles. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread the grapes, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow. Their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. All right, so this weaves together all the stuff that we're looking at and puts it in the day of the Lord. Now, we're going to see this very thing quoted in the book of Revelation in a bit. Micah 4, 10 through 12. Writhe and scream, daughter of Zion, like a woman in childbirth. We're in the birth pangs. For now you will go out of the city and go to Babylon. There the Lord will redeem you. In Babylon, the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. And now, many nations have been gathered against you. So let me explain what's going on here. The children of Zion were, in exile, thrown into Babylon, by Babylonians, by Babylon, by Nebuchadnezzar. The temple was destroyed. They were exiled to Babylon. But there's going to be a second exodus from all the nations. In this case, is focusing on the north, on Babylon. And there, in Babylon, you will be redeemed and brought back in a second exodus to Israel. There, the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. And now, many nations have been gathered against you who say, let her be defiled. So he's brought them back in the second exodus. Just picture a mountain and a camp on the mountain, and it's Jerusalem, and all the righteous are there in Israel, and now all the nations gather against it. So this passage too has the second Exodus and number 3, Armageddon, so to speak. Many nations have been gathered against you who say, let her be defiled, and let our eyes gloat over Zion. But they don't know the thoughts of the Lord. They don't understand his plan. Why? Because God has gathered them like sheaves to the threshing floor to be beaten. Threshing floor is where you beat out the grain. I'm going to say it again. God must gather the whole world together against us. God is doing this. God is the one who's bringing a one-world government, so to speak. God is the one who's changing the government and the structure of politics and, turning the whole world against believers and Judeo-Christian ethics and, yes, righteousness. But that's why it's happening, because God is doing it. So don't freak out. Zephaniah 3:8. Therefore wait for me, says God, for the day when I rise up as a witness. Indeed, my decision, God says, is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them my hate. My indignation means the frothing of the mouth. just so angry that you get foam in your mouth. That's God's decision to do that. All my burning anger for all the earth will be devoured by the fire of my jealousy. Jealousy for who? For Israel. Zechariah 12, 2 through 6, and then verse 9. Behold, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes staggering to all the peoples. Now what that means is like a cup filled with wine. He's going to force the world to drink it until they get so drunk that they don't even know what's going on, and then God kills them. That's what he's talking about. Causes staggering to all the peoples. The siege is against Jerusalem. In that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will get a hernia, is what it says. Will injure themselves severely. They'll get a hernia. And all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Against what? Against Jerusalem. And in this case, it's not really Jerusalem. It's the whole of the righteous people in Israel that have been brought back in the Exodus, the second Exodus. In that day, I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. Let me read that again. In that day, in the day of the Lord, I will seek to destroy. God will seek, like manipulate and plan and draw battle plans and figure out, cool ways to do it. To destroy all the Gentiles that come against Jerusalem. That is not now. Quit quoting these verses like this is now. It's not now. This is in the birth pangs. And only in the birth pangs. And only linked with the second Exodus and then, quote, Armageddon. So I'm going to say this again. Joseph's bones going up to the land is prophetic of three different gatherings. Number one, the resurrection. Number two, the second Exodus. And now number three, God gathering all the wicked to wipe them out, which people call Armageddon. Zechariah 14, 1 through 3. Behold, a day. It doesn't say an hour. It doesn't say a people. It doesn't say a place. It says a day. Why? Because it's the day of the Lord. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord. That means the day of the Lord. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem. Who's going to gather all the nations against the righteous people? God. God is doing this. To battle. And the city will be taken. The houses plundered. The women raped. Half of the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be eliminated from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on the day of battle. This is Yom Kippur, end of the birth pangs, 7th year of the birth pangs, in the day of the Lord. Revelation 14, 17 through 20. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he had a sharp sickle. Remember in Joel it said, put in the sickle because the harvest is ready to be pulled in and tromped in the winepress. Another angel called to him, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth because her grapes are ripe. The angel swung his sickle to the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out from the winepress up to the horses' bridles. It's about 5 feet tall, for a distance of about 184 miles. Believe this if you want. Don't believe it if you don't want. I don't know if this is pictorially speaking or for real. 5 feet tall, 184 miles, because it says 1,600 stadia, and the numbers mean something. I don't know. I don't know if it's physical or not, but I know it's physically going to happen. I don't know if it's physically going to be that deep for 184 miles, but I know it's going to happen. And I know God is going to judge all the Gentiles all at once through us and him. Revelation 16, 14 through 16. Spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the entire world to gather them together. I thought it was God gathering them together. Now it says demons are going to go gather them together. That's right, because demons can only do what God says to do. Don't think that there's like a whole bunch of battle forces of Lucifer, which, by the way, is not his name. His name is not Lucifer. That's Greek. His name is Hellel, which is Hebrew. And then Hellel has all his forces, and they're able to do what they want. And then God has his forces, and they're able to do what they want. And they join in battle, and God only knows who's going to win. This is insanity. Demons and Hasatan are servants of God. You can believe that or not, but that's how the Bible paints it. They are servants of God. They must present themselves before God to do what they want to do or to do what God tells them to do. But ultimately, it's God's choice. And he assigns demons to do what they do. He allows Hasatan some authority. So, here it says the demons go do miracles and gather everybody together to be killed. Because God's heart is to gather them together to be killed. For the war, let me read this again, which go out to the kings of the entire world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God, the Almighty. Now it's a day of God. This is Yom Kippur, the great day of God, the Almighty. And they gathered them together to the place called Har Megiddo. Revelation 19, 17 through 19. Then I saw an angel. He cried out with a loud voice, saying to all the birds, there's those demons, come, assemble for the great feast of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings and commanders and mighty men and the flesh of all people. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered to make war against him who sat on the horse and his army, that being the Messiah. They're going to make war against God coming to earth, so to speak, in the form of the Messiah. Crazy. Revelation 19, 17. Oh, what is this? Oh, this is Revelation 20, 21. I have the wrong verses here. This is Revelation 21, after the day of the Lord, after the 1,000-year day of the Lord. When the 1,000 years are completed, Hasatan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations which are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. I thought we already got rid of Gog and Magog. Wasn't Gog and Magog already wiped out at Har Megiddo, at Yom Kippur, in the 7th year of the birth pangs? So how do they pop up again after the day of the Lord? Because God gathers them again and does it again, does the whole exercise again. Only this time, it doesn't take no 4,000 years. It takes about a week and done. Forever. Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore, and they come up and surrounded the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven. Done. All done. And that's how it ends. And then the rest of eternity is the New Jerusalem. But that's how it ends. It ends very quickly, very abruptly. And devoured them. Done. Because even during the 1,000 years, even though it's going to be basically heaven on earth, even during the day of the Lord, the Shabbat of God, there's still going to be people to rise up against the Jews. Now, they'll have no power because it's going to be a Jewish world. It's going to be heaven on earth. But even in the perfect situation, think about this, even in the perfect situation on earth, millions of people are going to have in their heart to kill these Jews. Well, Adam and Eve were in the perfect situation. Look what they did. So it's no surprise. And so God regathers them again one last time, and poof, zot, done. It's all done. And then the rest is heaven. All right, so the bones of Joseph predict and prophesy for us all three of these gatherings. The resurrection, when our bones go up. The regathering, the second Exodus, when our bones go up to Israel. All the righteous go up to Israel in the day of the Lord. And then the third one, when God gathers all the wicked for destruction, also in the day of the Lord. So I hope you've been able to follow this. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did given it. So you can say, bring up my bones, Lord, bring up my bones. Shabbat Shalom.